And 10 days since the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was seen among FBI agents who were raiding an election center in Fulton County, Georgia, seizing ballots and other election material from the 2020 presidential election. In the days since, we've heard many different explanations from President Trump and his administration for why she was there, with the most recent version coming from Attorney General Pam Bondi yesterday.
She was down there with Deputy Director Andrew Bailey of the FBI. And I'm not going to talk about any other details of that matter right now because Georgia's a very important issue to us. She was there. We're inseparable. That's all I'll say.
If that was a little bit confusing, listen as other members of the administration try to explain Gabbard's role.
What was Tulsi Gabbard doing at an election center in Georgia today?
She's working very hard on trying to keep the election safe.
Why was she there?
And secondly, I don't know why the director was there. She is not part of the grand jury investigation.
And this week, Gabbard herself confirmed it, writing in a letter to Democrats on the House and Senate Intelligence Committees that, quote, my presence was requested by the president.
Why was Tulsi Gabbard involved in a domestic law enforcement search in Georgia?
Tulsi Gabbard has been tapped by the president of the United States to oversee the sanctity and the security of our American elections.
Why is Tulsi Gabbard there?
I don't know, but, you know, a lot of the cheating comes from it's international cheating. Tulsi Gabbard is doing a great job. They say, why is she doing it? Right, Pam? Why is she doing it? Because Pam wanted her to do it.
To be clear, this visit was not happening in a vacuum. It comes at the same time the administration is requesting voter rolls from nearly every state. Republican lawmakers are pushing an election bill that critics claim would disenfranchise millions of voters. And Trump is calling for the federal government to get involved in the midterm elections. Election administrators and legal experts are raising the alarm that this is all right out of Trump's playbook ahead of an election he thinks he is going to lose and is laying the groundwork so he can contest the results of yet another election. Symone Sanders Townsend and Miles Taylor are back with us. Miles, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security. How do you see all of these intersecting over the next 10 months to potentially impact the midterm elections?
A dangerous clown car for democracy. This is the classic aphorism in politics that when you're explaining, you're losing. They're explaining so much that they are revealing that there is something else going on here. This is an obvious cover-up. It's not like where there's smoke, there's fire. There's a wildfire down here. And I want to remind viewers of this. Back in August of 2023, Donald Trump was charged on 13 felony counts in Fulton County, Georgia, for trying to meddle in the election to overturn it so he could win the state.
We heard the audio.
We heard the audio. He's looking for 11,700 and I think 58, very specific votes. So he was already had his eyes on the ballots in that place. Then fast forward, coincidentally, he comes back into office and there's an as yet revealed foreign intelligence plot that has to do with not just Georgia, but Fulton County, the same place where he was charged. And then FBI agents show up and they take those ballots. You can only believe one of two things is true. Either you believe the administration that there's some secret foreign plot we didn't know about in that place, or you can believe Donald Trump has gone back to the scene of the crime 5 years later. We've all seen this in crime shows. We've seen this from experts who say when someone commits a crime, they're often likely to go back to the scene. Donald Trump's people appear to have done this. And I also, Vaughn, think about the shifting narratives. It lets us realize that something's true. We compare all the dots here and we connect them and see the president clearly knew this raid was going to happen. He was clearly in communication with two of his top cabinet secretaries about that raid, micromanaged it so much so that he made sure one of them, the DNI, was there personally. And then afterwards, what did he do? He made sure he got on the phone with the agents to thank them for what they did. That's pretty damning.
The shifting narratives also tell us that somebody's lying, okay? Because these people should be on the same page in some way, shape, or form. Don't nobody know why the hell Tulsi Gabbard was down there? Donald Trump said it was Bondi. Tulsi said it was him. So nobody knows why this one was down there.
Apparent president don't even know.
He said, I don't know.
This week it was, I don't know.
Yeah, it changes. And that's with all of us who have covered and paid attention to this administration, this one and the first one, that is when lies are happening. One thing I think, Symone, that is really important, and we we've talked about in this show, you guys have talked about it a lot in your show, is that the going to Georgia, talking about it as much as Trump is talking about, is not just about 2020 and kind of rehashing and relitigating and living in that world again. It is also about 2026. It is also about 2028.
Yeah, very much so. Look, I have been saying I think the president is trying to steal the 2026 election, but it's not going to be like changing ballots, right? How we think about it in the movies. Like, this is not a scandal episode, folks. But just look at what he has done just within the first year of his administration. One of the first executive orders he issued was, in fact, about elections. It is important to note that constitutionally, the federal government has no power in elections. Elections are run by the states.
He wants to change that.
He would like to change that, but the founders did it intentionally. This was not an accident that how the government was, in fact, set up. By the people, for the people. That's why the people in the states are the ones that are administering the election. But he wants to take over election administration. He is requesting the states, Democratic states and Republican states. There's actually only 4 states in this country that have yet to get a request or turn over their voter rolls to this White House. That should be scary for everyone. And not to mention him picking up the phone, calling Texas, saying, I need you to find me 5 more seats. So there are many ways in which they're looking to affect this election, not just one, ICE at the polls. So I think that Democrats, particularly the Democratic governors and Democratic secretaries of state, have to be vigilant. And last thing I'll say is Gretchen Whitmer, who is the vice chair of the Democratic Governors Association, she has now been speaking a lot more publicly about this real concern. I have talked to the governors privately, and you would think we had tinfoil hats on in this conversation. I said, well, are you all sure that your elections are going to be secure? They said, we are sure that we are going to have elections. We believe that they will be secure. We are concerned about the intimidation and what could happen in the days after.
It's a really good point, Simone, to note that the intensifying push around elections is coming from various different entities of the Republican Party. It's not just from Trump. But one thing that also stood out to me about sort of the Spider-Man meme-esque of the finger pointing, like who sent Tulsi Gabbard where this week, is also the fact that there is no pretense anymore that all these law enforcement entities are acting in tandem with the president. There is no veneer of even independence here. I mean, how dangerous is it, Miles, that the DNI and the Justice Department are essentially a personal grievance arm for this president now?
Inseparable.
Well, I mean, it sets a precedent that, as Simone noted, we're going to really have to worry about this year. For the people who are confused about all the different moving pieces here, let me even further distill it. At the beginning of January, Donald Trump did a sit-down interview with the New York Times where he lamented and bemoaned the fact that he didn't seize the ballots in 2020. Now, it's not legal for the President of the United States to seize the ballots, right? And that was controversial that he was even lamenting it. And then 3 weeks later, FBI agents go and literally seize the ballots that he's upset that he didn't seize in 2020. Donald Trump.
Right. If they're not speaking
now,
directly, they're speaking through Fox News hits.
Well, and then this week on NBC, he said, why were they down there? He defied all the explanations of his administration about foreign interference, and he said they're going to count that ballots and find out who won the 2020 election. If we take Donald Trump's word for it, in the interview with Tom Lamas in the Oval Office, the federal government is doing an illegal, secret recount of the 2020 election right now. That's not just illegal. It is fundamentally unconstitutional. If he can do it in Fulton County, where else will he do it in the country? Do we have to worry about FBI agents in 10 battleground states swooping in after the election? I think we now very much do.